Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz. Today we're going to talk about goals. And we have with us Timothy Carey, who's a PhD. He's the chair, country health research and innovation at Curtin University. And he was previously the inaugural director of the Institute of Global Health Equity Research and the Andrew Weiss Chair of Research in Global Health at the University of Global Health Equity in Rwanda. Dr. Carey, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Michael. It's great to be here.
So I came across an article that you wrote about goal setting, and I found it fascinating. And in it, you talked about how you had watched a TED Talk, and the speaker was anti-goal setting. What were his reasons for being against goal setting?
He was a fascinating guy, actually. I found out about it on LinkedIn. You know how you get all these kind of
Yeah.
random tips and messages on LinkedIn. And someone had watched this TED Talk and really liked it. And they were kind of talking about how great the perspective was and so on. So I started to watch it, and after a couple of minutes, I didn't want to watch it anymore because it was saying things that I thought were completely opposite to what I believe. But I was so intrigued that I had to keep watching it. And his story was that he had been trying out to be a pro footballer essentially, and so he'd had goals about getting into the top draft. And I'm not sure what all the processes are in the States for becoming a pro footballer, but he was going through them. And at the tryouts, he did 100-meter sprint, and he damaged his leg really badly. And he put that down to the fact that he had this really important goal, and he had lost a lot of weight very quickly, and there were factors involved. But anyway, his interpretation of that was that the reason that he got into that awful place was because he had a goal, and so he developed these ideas that anytime you set goals, it sets you up for failure. In fact, he kind of went as far as to say that it guarantees failure, and so the way to fail in life is to set goals from his perspective.
Now, you say that we are designed to achieve goals. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. I think we're and it all gets back to the way that we think about goals and define goals. So I know there's lots of talk from performance coaches and other people about SMART goals, goals that are specific, measurable, and so on. But we could think about goals more broadly as just any kind of standard or benchmark that we want to achieve. So even at a physiological level, we could say that our bodies have goals of keeping our body temperature at a certain place, or we have goals for keeping a certain amount of oxygen in our blood. And once you start thinking about goals in that way, we can think about a whole host of things. So people with diabetes, for example, who get diagnosed with, say, type 2 diabetes, the standard of the amount of sugar in their blood changes. So it gets back to these specifications or preferences that we have about a whole myriad of things: how fast we like to drive our cars, how far behind the car in front we like to be, where we like to spend our holidays, how much money we like to get paid. All those kinds of things could be thought of as goals.
Yeah, so it seems like all human behavior is outside of reflexes, all human behavior is goal directed. Would it be safe to say that we all have goals and these goals are either going to be consciously and rationally chosen, or we're just going to pick them up subconsciously or unconsciously, as if by osmosis, basically just what we happen to pick up in life? Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it, Michael. In fact, we I had an example of this just in the last couple of days. I went on my 17-year-old son and I were both up early one morning, and in the past we've done a lot of running together. So we're both up early. We like running at the very earliest times in the morning when it's still dark and just starting to get light. So we decided to go on a run, and I've had nothing like what the TED talker went through, but I've had a bit of a niggle in one of my legs, so I didn't want to push the timing too much. But just we decided to go on a 6 mile, 10 Ks in 10 kilometers in our language, but we decided to go on a 6 mile run and just not push it for time, but just kind of see how we went. What we noticed, I kept looking at my watch, and for the first few miles, every mile that we ran was a little bit quicker than the one before. So then we got this idea in our head to make the next goal, the next mile, quicker than the one that had previously been. And again, in our language, we ended up in our distances, we ended up running 10 kilometers, and at the 7-kilometer mark, we got under 6 minutes for the kilometer. So then we got an idea in our head that it would be great to make the next kilometer under 6 minutes as well. And we ended up running the last 4 kilometers under 6 minutes. Now, we had no idea about that before we started going out on the run. All we wanted to do, our goal going on the run, was just to run together, to enjoy it, and to have fun kind of hanging out together. But as things started to change, we set new goals that we didn't kind of deliberately set them, but they just kind of happened, and they became goals for us. I think the same kind of thing happens if a friend invites you out to a restaurant you've never been to before, and you try a dish that you've never had, and you like it. That can become a goal to have it again and again and again, and to try different things of the same type. So I think change is kind of happens all the time. I think we're setting and adjusting our goals and preferences constantly.
You wrote something that really caught my attention. You said that our lives are the goals we pursue. What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, just that. I think we, people have said we are what we eat. I think we are the goals we set. The goals that we have and the goals that we pursue are who we are. And I guess that's one of the things I think is most intriguing about goals, that we have goals at all sorts of different levels, and you can get a sense of the levels by asking yourself why and how questions. So if you ask yourself, for example, why do I like to drive at the speed limit? You might say that, well, it's because I don't want to get a speeding ticket. And why don't you want to get a speeding ticket? Well, I don't want to lose my license. And why don't I want to lose my license? Well, because then I can drive my car wherever I want to go. And why do I want to drive my car wherever I want to go? Well, that gives me the freedom to live the life I want to live. And very soon, if you ask yourself a series of why questions about any goal, you get to a kind of a sort of a nice, really highly valued place about, well, that's just the way life is, or that's the person I want to be, or something like that. Going the other way, how questions very quickly get quite concrete and sometimes difficult to answer. So if I ask myself, well, how do I drive at the speed limit? I would say, well, I keep an eye on what speed I'm currently doing, and I pay attention to the conditions of the road, and I make sure that my speed is always going at what the sign indicates. And so I could ask, well, how do I make sure my speed's going at the right speed? How do I make sure I'm going at the right speed? Well, I make sure I look at any signs that are on the road, and I change the angle of my foot to make sure that the accelerator pedal is where it's supposed to be. Then you could ask something like, well, how do I change the angle of my foot? And that gets, well, I kind of tense this muscle and relax that a little bit and move my foot around. So the how questions get quite concrete, and the why questions get very highly valued and quite abstract. But the important point is that they're all goals. So how you place your foot on the accelerator pedal is a little goal, and so is living the life I want to live and being the person I want to be.
It reminds me of like we are what we do. We are the
Mm.
experiences that we have, the actions that we take. That is who I am as a person. And that's all that is dictated by the goals that I set, either deliberately or just I want to go to the store or I want to go to the beach. It doesn't matter if I thought about it for a week or for a second, it's still goal directed. And the type of goals that I set out to achieve, that's the type of person that I am. That's who I am, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it in a nutshell. And I guess one of the kind of quirky twists to this way of thinking about who we are and what we do is that our actions aren't necessarily directly related to the goals that we have. So sometimes we have to act in almost opposite ways to achieve the same goal. So as a very simple example, to keep my car positioned in the lane on the road where I want it to be, sometimes I have to turn the steering wheel to the left and sometimes I have to turn it to the right, depending on the conditions of the road. So at all times, we're varying our actions to keep our goals the way we want them to be. So it's our it's our actions that certainly help us achieve our goals, but our actions have to be kind of in sync or in tune with the environment that we're in. So if we're in a busy, noisy restaurant, we'll increase the volume of our voice in our conversation so that we're heard and we can continue having a good time with our friends and colleagues. But if we're in a much more subdued, quieter restaurant, we'll kind of lower the tone of our voice to achieve exactly the same thing.
For the audience that saw me looking down, I was looking for a quote, but I couldn't find it because it reminded me of what you're talking about. It reminds me of my next question. You asked before we came on about the philosophy behind the show. I'm a
Mm.
adherent to Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism, and she defined life, and I'm not going to get it exact, and that's why I wanted to find the quote. But basically, it's a process of self-generated and self-regulating action. And that reminds me of what you said earlier when you talked about our lives are the goals we pursue. But it also reminds me of my next question because you describe goal setting as a process. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Yeah, just that, and pretty much like the words from the quote that you just mentioned. I think self-regulation or self-determination, it goes by lots of different terms, but control is the term that I like the best. And it's a bit like if you think about the cruise control mechanism of a car. So when we're going along the highway, we can press start the cruise control and set it at the speed that we want, and then the car varies how many revs it does, and I don't know terribly a lot about cars, but it changes how fast it's going to keep it at the speed that you've set. I think we and other living things operate in exactly the same way, except for the crucial difference that you can't adjust the setting from the outside. So no one else can kind of tweak our goals for us. We're the only ones who make those adjustments. But once the adjustments are made, we self-regulate and do what we have to do to act on the environment to make sure we keep seeing and feeling and hearing the things that we've set for ourselves. I can't hear you, Michael.
Is it safe to say that
Ah.
whereas other life forms come pre-programmed with their goals, that us humans, we have to select our goals. We have to choose our goals. We have to choose what we want to achieve. Is that accurate? And if so, can you elaborate on it or speak to it?
Yeah, I think that is pretty accurate. I think that's what the learning from the time we're born, we kind of learn and experience things from the environment, and we develop different ways of being and doing and things that we like and don't like. Having said that, I think we're actually born with certain preferences. So even little tiny babies, differ in how much they like to be held, when they like to be fed, how often they like to be fed, how much they can tolerate light and dark and noise and all those kinds of things. So I think we are born with certain specifications or standards, but from that beginning, we then, and the environments that we're in, we encounter different experiences and develop certain conditions and goals about that. And even we know that that the same environmental situation affects different people differently. So people can go through traumatic experiences, for example, and some people are debilitatingly distressed by that experience for a long time afterwards. Whereas other people are able to reconcile it in their minds and kind of sort it out and get back pretty much to living the sort of life that they want to live. So I think our goals get adjusted all the time. Sometimes we do that deliberately and consciously when we, make a New Year's resolution or do something where we make a deliberate effort to kind of change course a little bit and move in a different direction, maybe get a new career or something like that. But a lot of the time, all of the other goals that we're not thinking about are still there. They're just kind of ticking away in the background, keeping our lives going the way that we want them to be and have set them to be.
Now
Is that the
you,
kind of thing that you were asking about?
yeah. Now you mentioned control a few minutes ago, and you mentioned in your article, you also mentioned control. What is the relationship between goal setting and control?
Okay, so control, I think of control as the process underpinning goal setting. So the basic idea is that we have a goal or a standard or a preference or an ambition or an objective. The guy in the TED talk, he preferred the term objective, so we can call them objectives. Whatever it is, it's just a particular benchmark, and then we do whatever we need to do to stop the environment changing that benchmark, if you like. So when we're driving our car, if we want it to be going at 50 miles an hour, we have to keep adjusting where our foot is on the accelerator pedal to keep our car going at that speed. So if we come upon a hill and we start climbing, we'll do things that are kind of different to what we do once we start going down the other side of the hill. And if we're in heavier traffic, we do different things. So we keep life, I guess, the process of goal achievement, which is how I think about life. Control, actually, I think is life, and it's that process of continually adjusting and tweaking our actions so that what we experience or what we sense remains the way that we want it to remain. And from this perspective, control is the difference between living and non-living things. So a mannequin in a shop store front window doesn't control. They just get moved and positioned the way the store owners want them to look. Whereas people do control, and you can't move them around like you want them to, or you might want them to, without them often pushing back and causing making things be the way they want them to be and causing some strife sometimes.
Years ago, I read a book by a plastic surgeon, Maxwell Maltz, called Cybernetics. Are you familiar with the book at
Yeah,
all?
I do know the book. I haven't read all of it, but yeah, I do know the book.
But he talked about, and like I said, it's been 20 years since I've read it, but he talked about sort of that adjustment process. As you, when you set a goal, you might have distractions, things come on, but the goal will always help bring you back to the center to keep
Mm.
going toward it. That's when you talk about control, that's sort of what it reminds me of. Is he actually gave an example of an outfielder in a baseball game. and the
Hmm.
ball's way up in the air and he goes to the right and then he adjusts himself and he keeps doing it until he gets it and he makes that catch. And that's what that reminds me of when
Yeah,
you were
yeah.
just talking about control.
Oh, that's so amazing, Michael. Yes, that's exactly right. Cybernetics is where this part of where some of the ideas of cybernetics is where these ideas of control have come from. A really good friend of mine, a professor in California, has actually developed little models of outfielders catching baseballs based on this idea of control, and it's exactly that they Rick Markin, his name is, and he's got these little models, and you can play them, and you see the ball go up, and the little dot representing the outfielder moves around and makes constant little adjustments to end up catching the ball. So it's exactly that process. Jason Fung, who's a Canadian diabetic specialist. He helps people with weight loss um, and kidney disorders. He's written loads and loads of books, and he focuses on homeostasis. He calls homeostasis as the defining characteristic of life. Well, from this perspective, homeostasis is control as well. It's just that process of keeping things in balance, keeping things kind of making constant adjustments to keeping things in balance. And so the psycho-cybernetics idea is very much the way I approach psychological problems, or when people get distressed. It has lots of different flavors. We call it anxiety and depression and all sorts of different things. But from the approach that I use, it's all about goals again, and goals being in conflict with each other. So sometimes we have goals that oppose each other. I might want to leave my partner, but I also want to stay at the same time, or I I want to stand up for myself at work, but I don't want to cause a fuss and draw attention to myself. So it's that idea of people describe it in all sorts of different ways: a struggle or a battle or arguing or fighting with myself. That for me is the basis of all kind of psychological problems or psychological distress.
Now, obviously, all goals aren't created equal. And earlier you
Hmm.
mentioned the why and the how. What are some pointers for effective goal setting for both the types of goals we should set and how to go about achieving them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're absolutely right. I don't think all goals are created equal, and I think sometimes just noticing, in terms of all the things we've spoken about so far, just noticing the way that you live your life is the first step in kind of becoming aware of the goals that are important to you. It doesn't matter so much what you say is important. It really matters what what unfolds as you live the life that
Right.
you live. So,
Let me interrupt you for 1 second because I that is one of my most important principles when it comes to human behavior, both my own and others, because people can say they value all kinds of high-minded stuff,
mhm, mhm,
but if their actions are not pursuing those high-minded values, then those aren't their real values. Those are professed
yeah,
values. Those are
yes,
professed goals. Your
yes.
real goals and your real values are manifested in what you do, what you say.
Hmm. Well, yeah, that's exactly it, Michael. And again, I think even thinking about things from a goal perspective sheds sheds some light on that as well. So I think sometimes how we use our words or what we say with our words is to achieve certain goals, but they're not really the goals that we have that are really important to us. So, I could say things to you with my words because I want you to think of me in a certain way, or I want you to respond to me, or I want you to maybe share things with me, but they might not be the really important goals that I pursue once I'm not in your company. So I know workplaces, for example, have stated values and mission statements. There are things like being respectful and being open and transparent in our communication. Yet they can exclude people from meetings, and they can have things going on that some people don't know about. They can treat people disrespectfully. So I think there is a tension between what we present and how we like to portray things as a goal, but then the goals that we actively pursue in a moment to moment and day to day basis, and they can be quite different.
So back to the original question before I interrupted you, I was asking you about effective goal setting. So how does one go about aligning their goals properly, setting reachable goals that are going to push the person, but not so easy, like, I want to tap my knee, or, something silly like that. So what is an effective process in this regard when it comes to goal setting?
Yeah, thanks. So I think one of the keys is the word that you used just then about aligning our goals, and I think that's really the key. That the for me, the key to a contented, fulfilling, satisfying life, whatever the life is that a person wants to live, I think it's about having, if we could use a phrase, of a reconciled mind. So a mind that is not conflicted, that doesn't have goals that are fighting or warring with each other, but someone who's clear about the goals that they have and is kind of just on the course pursuing them. And I think that can happen using the why and how kind of questions that I talked about before. So when I'm working as a clinical psychologist with people, the basic conversation I have with them, I don't offer advice or suggestions or tell them what to do or give them strategies or anything like that. We just have a conversation focusing on their goals, and I constantly look for the goal kind of in the background, if that makes sense, or the why goal, the higher level goal from the goals that we're talking about. And that's because of the way that we think goals are connected. So a goal at one level achieves its goal by setting the standards for goals at a lower level. And that's why the why and the how become so important. That might sound a bit like mumbo jumbo, but it's just it's something as simple as, if I want a goal of being a good friend, then I'll vary my goals about how much contact I have with, how much I email them, how much I get on the phone with them, how much I catch up with them on the weekend. So and I vary all those sorts of things, the activities that I do, so that I keep the higher level goal of being a good friend the way I want it to be. So in order to live the life that we want to live, it's important to become clear about what those higher level goals are that are really the ones kind of steering the ship, if you like, or driving things. And they'll, if we become clear of those, then they kind of help adjust and tweak the lower level goals that are much more the day-to-day, what we do and how we go about our daily activity.
So back to the TED talker.
Yeah.
He talked about how if you don't have goals, you can't fail. Now, no one's going to achieve every goal that they ever set, at least nobody I've ever met, right? So as a clinical psychologist, how do you recommend people deal with the failure to achieve a goal?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's very much part of the TED Talk. So this chap's perspective was that goals are very limiting, because once you achieve a goal, then that's kind of the end. And even if you don't achieve it, then you've failed. Whereas objectives for him were limitless, was the term that he used. Well, I kind of think it's all perspective. It's all the way that we think about things. So if you don't achieve a goal, you could describe that as a failure, or you could describe it as getting information to help you plan your next goal, or to do what you want to do next. So I know there's all sorts of quotes about failure and mistakes if you Google them, and great scientists like Einstein and other people saw mistakes and failure as a necessary part of success and a necessary part of the learning process. So anytime you don't achieve a goal, that gives you information about what you can do next to get better at goal achieving. So it again, for me, it kind of comes back to perspective and to learning, which again is a goal. So if you want to keep learning, if you want to keep improving, if that's a goal, then anything you get in is just helps you know a little bit better what to do next.
Thank you very much. I think that was well said. Is there anything that we didn't cover about goals that you think we should have covered, or anything I didn't ask that perhaps I should have asked?
Oh, another great question. This has been a pretty ranging conversation. I think we've covered loads. Something that popped into my mind a little while ago was a smartphone app. A few years ago, I developed a smartphone app for that I thought might be useful for people who maybe didn't want to go and see a psychologist. And the app essentially helps people focus on their goals. So when you can, the app just sends to your phone a question, and there's I think there's 51 or 2 different questions. So you get a different question each time. It cycles through them randomly, and you can set the time that you want to get the questions within. So maybe between 9 and 3, and you can set how many questions, up to 10 that you get, and then the app just randomly throughout that time sends you a question. And the questions are things like, what goal are you pursuing at the moment? Or are you being the you want to be right now? Or what are you thinking about just now? Or what's at the front of your mind at the moment? And they're all just little prompts to help people stay focused on the things that are important to them.
Thank you very much. So where can people find you? I mean, I found you in a Psychology Today blog, but where else can people find you?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I've got a website, drtimcarey.com. If you Google this podcast will help a lot. If people Google my name, they should be able to find me. And the Mindsurf is the name of the app, and the therapy that I use is called the method of levels, and that ties into the why and how questioning, because we think of goals being at all sorts of different levels. So this method helps people move up and down the levels to look at the goals that they have there.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us here today. I really appreciate it.
It's been wonderful, Michael. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank
For
you.
now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Liebowitz. Till next time.